Today's story is called The Morning Toby Sat Closer to Mr. Ellis. Welcome to Warm Life Stories, a quiet little corner where we slow down, breathe a little easier, and share gentle stories about ordinary people living ordinary days that somehow still touch the heart. If you enjoy quiet stories like this, feel free to subscribe or share your thoughts in the comments. We always love reading them. Now, if you're ready, let's settle in and gently step into today's story. The morning light rested softly on the old porch, the way it only does when the world hasn't fully woken yet. It touched the wooden railings first, warming the faded paint, then stretched slowly across the floorboards like a gentle hand smoothing out the wrinkles of the night. A cool hush still lingered in the air, thin, clean, almost blue in feeling. Somewhere down the street, a single bird began its morning song, testing the quiet before the day truly began. Its notes drifted through the stillness like threads of calm sewing the neighborhood together. Mr. Ellis liked mornings like this, mornings that didn't ask anything of him. He sat in his usual spot on the right side of the porch, the same spot he had sat in for years, the one that looked out toward the maple tree Maggie used to love. The wood beneath him creaked a little, familiar in its tiredness, steady in its presence. His hands, gentle and careful, wrapped around his chipped ceramic mug, the one with the small crack near the handle. The warmth from the coffee seeped into his palms slowly, reminding him he was here, awake, part of the morning in his own quiet way. The steam curled upward in thin, slow spirals, catching the early light. He lifted the cup close enough to feel that soft warmth touch his face. That tiny moment, the heat, the silence, the comfort, felt like an old friend sitting beside him. Most days, this time of morning felt predictable, as if each one was a page in the same soft book. The porch, the breeze, the mug, the quiet, all of it was a small ritual he didn't have to think about, and that was a comfort. Across the yard, the grass shimmered with a thin layer of dew. The maple leaves barely stirred, as if listening rather than moving. A faint smell of damp earth hovered near the steps, mixing with the scent of coffee in a way that made the moment feel grounded, real, gentle. A breeze lifted for just a second, brushing lightly against his sweater. The hem fluttered, then settled again. Mr. Ellis breathed in, slow and steady, and then out, even slower. There were mornings when the silence felt too big, too full of things he didn't say last night or the night before. But on mornings like this, soft, pale, almost tender, the silence felt like a blanket instead of a weight. On the left side of the porch sat the empty chair. He didn't look at it long, he never did, just long enough to notice it, long enough to remember it was there. The morning light touched it too, brushing over the seat as gently as if it remembered Maggie as well. Somewhere in that quiet, somewhere between the rising light and the slow breath, something shifted subtle as the flicker of a curtain. He couldn't name it, not yet, but he felt it. A softness, a nearness, as though the morning had brought with it something waiting, something small but meaningful. He let the stillness settle beside him. Another sip, another breath, another stretch of silence warm enough to lean into. And then, almost too softly to notice, he heard it. A faint step, a careful pad across the porch boards. Light, hesitant, familiar. But that part, that quiet presence approaching him, that belongs to the story we're about to tell. For now, it is enough to sit with Mr. Ellis, in this soft hour, in this gentle morning light, before anything changes. Take a breath with him. Feel the day beginning not with noise, but with something tender, something close. Something that, by the end of this morning, will rest closer to his heart than he ever expected. The soft sound came again, light, careful, almost polite. Mr. Ellis lowered his mug slightly, not alarmed, just curious in the quiet way older men often are. He didn't need to turn his head to know who it was. There were only a few creatures in the world that moved with that kind of delicate hesitation. Toby, the small gray and white cat, had been visiting the porch for nearly a year now, never asking for anything, never coming closer than the bottom step. Just a presence, a quiet, watchful little heartbeat on four paws. Mr. Ellis had come to expect him each morning, the way you expect a certain cloud to appear near the sun or a familiar song to drift from a neighbor's window. Not a promise, not a routine, just something that felt right when it happened. He finally turned his eyes toward the sound. There Toby was, sitting on the third step, tail curled neatly around his paws. His ears twitched once, then settled. Those eyes, soft amber, wiser than a cat's eyes, ought to be lifted toward Mr. Ellis with a calm that felt almost human. "Well now," Mr. Ellis murmured under his breath, though his voice barely rose above a whisper. "You're early." He didn't expect a reaction. Toby never reacted much. That was part of what made the little creature so easy to be around. No demands, no sudden movements, just quiet companionship from a respectful distance. But this morning, something was different. Toby blinked, slowly. Then he stood, stretching each paw forward in a long, careful motion, and walked up one more step. A step he had never taken before. Mr. Ellis didn't move, didn't even sip his coffee. He simply watched, the way someone watches a very small miracle approach. The porch had seen a lot of things over the years: Maggie's laughter, neighbors dropping by with small favors, Tommy running up and down the steps like a summer breeze that couldn't sit still. But it had never seen Toby climb this high, not once. The cat paused on the second step from the top. He looked around as if checking that the world was safe. Then, with surprising certainty, he climbed the final step and stepped onto the porch floorboards. Mr. Ellis felt his chest tighten, not in concern, but in that gentle, unexpected way a heart sometimes reacts when something soft chooses to come close. Toby sat down again, almost directly beside Mr. Ellis's worn shoe. Not touching, but close enough that the warmth of his small body reached the air between them. Mr. Ellis let out a breath he hadn't noticed he was holding. "Well," he whispered, "would you look at that?" He shifted slightly in his chair, not to move away, just to see better. The porch chair creaked, an old familiar voice adding itself to the moment. Toby didn't flinch, his ears didn't twist back. He only looked up with that calm amber gaze, as if to say he'd already made up his mind. Mr. Ellis studied him quietly. The careful pause, the tiny white whiskers, the little patch of gray shaped almost like a raindrop on his forehead. For the first time, he wondered where the cat slept at night, whether he belonged to someone, whether he wandered from porch to porch, or whether this one, somehow, had become his chosen place. Maggie would have loved him. She had always had a soft spot for shy animals, for creatures who took their time trusting the world. He could almost hear her voice in that memory-scented corner of his mind. "Some hearts move slow, Harold. Let them." The thought settled inside him like a warm hand on his shoulder. Toby looked away first, turning his head toward the yard where the maple tree cast soft shadows across the grass. But he didn't stand, didn't retreat. He simply sat there, quiet, steady, almost purposeful in his nearness. As if this morning, for reasons known only to a little cat's heart, he had decided to sit closer, much closer. And in that small closeness, something unnamed began to shift inside Mr. Ellis. The kind of shift that starts a story. The kind that asks to be noticed, even gently. For a moment, the porch settled into an even deeper quiet. The kind of quiet where memories feel comfortable enough to step forward. Mr. Ellis kept his gaze on Toby, but something inside him drifted, not away from the morning, but gently backward through it, as if the cat's nearness had opened a small door, one he hadn't meant to close, one he hadn't realized was still shut. He remembered another morning, years ago, when Maggie stood exactly where Toby now sat. She'd been humming, she always hummed without knowing it, holding a bowl of warm milk between her palms. The sun was brighter that day, almost too bold, but she didn't seem to mind. "There's a little tabby that comes by sometimes," she had said, setting the bowl down by the steps. "He's skittish, poor thing, probably hasn't had someone to trust in a long time." Her voice had been soft, not sad, just observant, just kind. Back then, Mr. Ellis had teased her gentle teasing, the kind that comes from long years of love. "You're going to end up feeding every creature in this neighborhood," he'd said, shaking his head. Maggie had only smiled in that knowing way of hers. "Maybe," she answered, "but kindness spreads, Harold, even when we can't see where it lands." The memory warmed him now, settling around him like the soft cardigan he wore. He could still picture her bent over the steps, her hair catching the morning light, her fingers tapping the rim of the bowl twice, her quiet signal that she hoped the cat would feel safe enough to come. Toby shifted slightly beside his shoe, and the movement tugged another memory from its pocket, this one older. He saw himself as a boy, maybe 9, maybe 10, sitting behind his childhood house with a small ginger kitten curled awkwardly in his lap. The kitten had been shaking, trembling so softly that only a child with a gentle heart would have noticed. He remembered placing his hands around it the way he now held his mug, carefully, as if warmth alone could mend things. His mother had peeked out the kitchen window then, smiling at the sight. "You've always had that touch," she'd told him later. "A quiet one, animals know." He hadn't thought of that afternoon in decades. Funny how memory works. Funny how a single small creature breathing, waiting, trusting, could reach through time and pull forward all the softer pieces a man thought he'd packed away. Toby lowered himself, stretching along the porch floorboards, paws tucked beneath his chest. His fur caught a ribbon of light, turning one patch almost silver. The sight nudged another recollection to the surface. He remembered the way Maggie used to stroke the maple tree's bark. Not in a sentimental way, just appreciative. She would run her fingers along it as she passed, murmuring something about how the tree had held so many summers with us. He had always thought the tree looked sturdier when she touched it. Now, as Toby closed his eyes, breathing slow, steady breaths, Mr. Ellis felt that same soft sturdiness settle in his chest. A quiet reminder that trust, even small trust, had weight, had meaning. He let the memories float there, not heavy, not painful, just present, like warm layers of an old quilt, patterns from different decades, stitched together in a way only time understands. Toby opened his eyes briefly, as if checking whether Mr. Ellis was still there, still steady. "I'm right here," Mr. Ellis whispered, surprised by how instinctive the words felt. He didn't know whether he was speaking to Toby, to Maggie lingering in memory, or to the boy he once was, maybe to all three. The morning air shifted again, soft, almost shy, and carried with it the faint scent of something familiar. Warm earth, old wood, a hint of dew evaporating, scents that felt like the background notes of his whole life. And beneath all of it, something else lingered. A quiet understanding, rising slowly, like sunlight climbing the porch rail. Some moments aren't new. They're old joys returning, in a different shape. The morning had settled into a gentle rhythm, the kind of rhythm that didn't rush, didn't push, didn't ask for anything except to be noticed. Toby lay quietly beside Mr. Ellis's shoe, one ear flicking every now and then at a distant sound, a mailbox closing somewhere down the street, a car door gently shutting, the low hum of a lawnmower warming up far away. Mr. Ellis took another small sip of his coffee, though the drink had cooled. He didn't mind. Most mornings, it was the warmth he cared about. But today it was the company. Toby's presence felt like a conversation without words, a calm acknowledgement that neither of them had to fill the silence with anything other than simply being there. Mr. Ellis leaned forward just a little, enough that his hand rested on his knee, fingers relaxed. He didn't reach out. Not yet. He didn't want to break whatever fragile trust had brought the little cat this close. The breeze shifted then, sending a small swirl of fallen maple leaves across the yard. A few of them brushed the porch steps before drifting to a quiet stop. Toby lifted his head to watch them, ears perked, eyes sharp but unbothered. That tiny movement drew a smile from Mr. Ellis. A slow, soft smile he hadn't felt tug at his face in a while. "You like the leaves, do you?" he murmured, his voice low, warm with a hint of amusement. Toby didn't answer. Of course. He only tilted his head slightly, then rested it back down on his paws. Comfortable, at ease. Mr. Ellis let out a breath, long and steady. Something inside him softened as he watched the cat settle into the porch as though it belonged here, perhaps as though he belonged here too. Present moments like this had been harder to feel lately. The porch, the house, the quiet, all of it had felt larger than him, as though he lived inside a world slightly too big for a single man to occupy. But Toby, closing that small distance between them, That simple act stitched the edges of the morning a little closer. A soft click came from the street. Mr. Clark, the mailman, had begun his daily route. Sure enough, a minute later the familiar footsteps made their way down the sidewalk, steady, dependable, almost as rhythmic as the old porch creaks. Mr. Clark lifted a hand in greeting as he opened the gate. "Morning, Harold," he called out with a friendly ease. "You've got someone keeping you company today." Mr. Ellis glanced down at Toby, who didn't budge. "Seems I do," he replied, his voice carrying a quiet pride he didn't try to hide. Mr. Clark smiled as he placed the mail on the small porch table. "Good to see him closer. Took the little fellow long enough, huh?" "It did," Mr. Ellis said softly. "But I suppose everyone moves at their own pace." The mailman nodded, tipping his cap before heading down the walkway. "See you tomorrow," he said with a small grin. "Tomorrow," Mr. Ellis echoed. When the gate clicked shut again, the porch fell back into stillness. Toby shifted, stretching his front legs out slowly, then nudged something forward with his paw. A small leaf, golden, curled at the edges, slid across the porch floor. Mr. Ellis blinked. "Is that for me?" he whispered, surprised by how touched he felt by the tiny gesture. Toby nudged it again, as if offering it a second time. Then he looked up at Mr. Ellis with those calm amber eyes, the kind of eyes that didn't demand anything, only invited connection. Mr. Ellis reached down then. Not fast, not hesitant, just a slow, honest movement. His fingers brushed the leaf first, then rested gently on the porch boards only an inch from Toby's paw. He didn't push further. He let the cat choose. Toby leaned forward, tentative, careful, brave in the small way quiet creatures often are. He touched Mr. Ellis's fingers with his nose, a tiny, warm nudge, soft as breath, real as heartbeat. Mr. Ellis felt something inside him shift, not break, not ache, just open. The moment passed softly, settling into the morning air like a note held just long enough to be felt. And for the first time in a long while, Mr. Ellis didn't feel like the only living soul on that porch. Something had changed. Not loudly, not dramatically, but deeply, exactly the way healing begins. For a good while, neither of them moved. The porch held the moment gently, as if it understood how delicate trust can be, how easily it can slip away if handled too quickly. Mr. Ellis kept his hand near Toby, not reaching any closer, just letting the cat decide what happened next. Toby, however, seemed in no hurry. He settled again, paws tucked neatly, his tail curling around himself like a small question mark at ease. Then something caught Mr. Ellis's eye. The leaf Toby had nudged toward him earlier now rested just next to the porch table leg. Its golden surface glowed faintly in the morning light, edges curled like they'd been held by the wind for too many days. But there, right near the stem, was a small shape barely noticeable at first, a tiny tear, one that looked almost intentional. He leaned a bit closer, careful not to disturb Toby. The tear wasn't just a rip. It curved slightly, like a small crescent. It reminded him of something he couldn't place immediately, something familiar. Toby watched him with half-lidded eyes, as though the little cat knew exactly what he was discovering. Mr. Ellis reached out slowly, picking up the leaf with 2 fingers. It was lighter than he expected, softer too, as if the season hadn't quite let go of it yet. He held it closer, examining that faint tear, and then it struck him. It looked like the shape of the small scratch on the porch step, the one Maggie made years ago when she accidentally dropped her gardening trowel. He hadn't thought about that scratch in a long time. Maggie had laughed about it, calling it her signature, saying the porch wouldn't feel like their porch without something a little imperfect, a little loved. He glanced at the step now, the memory settling over him like a warm shawl. The scratch was still there, thin, faded, but unmistakable. And the leaf? The leaf, with its small crescent tear, had rested gently right above it, as though placed with intention. "Did you really bring this to me?" he whispered to Toby, his voice barely more than a breath. Toby blinked once, slow, peaceful, present. Mr. Ellis felt something soften inside him, not just the tenderness of being offered a small object, but the feeling that this moment, this little leaf, connected threads of his life he didn't realize were still waiting to be held together. He traced the tear with his thumb. It was such a tiny detail, insignificant to most, but to him, it felt like a whisper from the past meeting the softness of the present. A breeze wandered across the porch again, lifting a few strands of his hair. The maple leaves in the yard rustled gently, as though clearing their throats before offering a quiet blessing. He looked down at Toby. "You've got quite the eye for things," he murmured. Toby tilted his head slightly, ears flicking in quiet interest. Mr. Ellis took a slow breath. There had been so many mornings, so many when he'd walked past the scratch on the porch, thinking it was just another mark time had left behind. But seeing it echoed in this small leaf, offered by this small visitor, stirred something deeper. Maybe the morning wasn't giving him a gift. Maybe it was reminding him of ones he already had. His hand, still resting near Toby, shifted slightly. Just a small motion, enough to give the cat another choice. Toby leaned forward again, more confidently this time, pressing the top of his head gently against Mr. Ellis's knuckles. A soft, wordless gesture so simple, yet so full that made the older man close his eyes for a moment. He stayed like that, breathing in the quiet, the soft fur against his hand, the warm morning light, the echo of Maggie's laugh somewhere in the back of his memory. When he opened his eyes, Toby had settled again, this time a touch closer his side, nearly touching Mr. Ellis's shoe. The leaf still rested between the porch rail and his fingers, a tiny offering, a tiny reminder, a tiny bridge between then and now, and in that gentle stillness, Mr. Ellis felt the truth rise to the surface of his heart. Not loudly, not insistently, but like a small, steady light. Sometimes it only takes one small thing to show us what's been quietly waiting to return. For a long moment, Mr. Ellis simply stayed there, hand resting on the porch floor. Toby leaned gently against his shoe, the golden leaf still cupped softly in his palm. The world felt quieter than usual, as if the morning itself had leaned in to witness this small shift between them. He didn't move right away. He didn't want to. There was something sacred about not disturbing fragile things. Toby lifted his head again, just slightly, brushing his whiskers against the cuff of Mr. Ellis's pant leg. It wasn't bold. It wasn't seeking anything. It felt more like acknowledgement. A wordless, "I'm here," spoken in the only language the little creature had. Mr. Ellis swallowed lightly. Funny how something so small, just a bit of warm fur against worn fabric, could feel like someone placing a gentle hand on your heart. He looked at the leaf again. The tiny crescent tear near the stem caught a sliver of sunlight, turning it into a soft, flickering glow. It felt like a memory breathing, a reminder, a presence. Slowly, very slowly, he set the leaf down beside him on the porch boards, letting it rest near the place where the step's old scratch lay. Then he placed his hand on his knee again. It trembled just a little. "I wasn't expecting much this morning," he whispered, voice barely above the rustle of the yard. "But this is something." The breeze shifted, warm now, brushing the porch rail with a soft sigh. Toby turned his face into it, closing his eyes as though savoring the feeling. His fur rippled in the sunlight, and when he opened his eyes again, he looked straight at Mr. Ellis. Not through him, not past him, at him. There was a quiet intelligence in those amber eyes, something steady, something calm, something that didn't push or demand. And for the first time in a long while, Mr. Ellis felt seen, not in a grand way, not in the way people talk about in books, but in the small, grounding way a creature recognizes another creature simply trying to make it through the day. He exhaled slowly. Something warm spread through his chest, not dramatic, not overwhelming, just a steady glow, the kind that fills a space without asking permission. He moved his hand toward Toby again, not to take, not to coax, just to offer. His fingers hovered for a beat above the cat's fur. Then he let them rest gently on Toby's back. The feeling was almost startling in its simplicity, soft fur beneath his fingertips, gentle warmth rising through the touch. Toby didn't pull away. Instead, he leaned into the contact, pressing a little closer, a tiny shift of acceptance that felt larger than the porch itself. A breath caught in Mr. Ellis's throat, not a painful catch, just a quiet pause of emotion, like the heart reminding itself it could still feel full. He stroked the cat's fur in small, slow motions. Up once, down once. Nothing hurried. Nothing claiming. Just presence. Toby let out a sound so faint it was barely audible. Not quite a purr, but something close. A soft vibration of trust. The morning seemed to brighten in response. Light slid across the porch floorboards like a warm hand smoothing the surface. A bird trilled from somewhere in the maple tree, its song carrying gently through the air. The breeze lifted the corner of the doormat and set it back down with the smallest sigh. All of it, every tiny movement of nature, felt like an echo of what was happening between him and the little cat. Mr. Ellis didn't realize how tightly he'd been holding himself in recent years, until that moment. A moment when something outside himself asked him to soften, and he finally answered. The ache he had carried quietly, the one born from empty chairs, quiet dinners, and long evenings when memory was louder than sound, seemed to loosen its grip. Not disappear, just loosen, enough to breathe around it. He rested his hand on Toby a little longer, letting the stillness between them fill with warmth instead of silence. "I'm glad you came closer today," he said, low and earnest. Toby blinked slowly, the feline version of a nod, and in that gentle exchange, hand to fur, heart to moment, the morning reached its softest, deepest point. A small turning, a small opening, a small beginning. The kind that stays. The light had shifted by the time Mr. Ellis pulled his hand back. Not dramatically, not suddenly, just the way morning light changes when no one is paying close attention. The soft gold had warmed into something fuller, touching the porch rail with a quiet confidence, as if assuring the world it had finally settled into its day. Toby stayed beside him, paws tucked once more, tail curled into an elegant curve. He wasn't pressed against Mr. Ellis, but he wasn't far either. A closeness that chose comfort without needing to claim it. Mr. Ellis slowly stood up from his chair. His knees responded with their usual hesitance, stiff at first, then loosening as he took a steady breath. Toby watched, head tilted slightly, but didn't run or shy away. His small presence grounded the moment more than any words could. "Well, let's get you something," Mr. Ellis murmured, brushing the dust from his sweater sleeve. He stepped into the house, letting the screen door sigh shut behind him. Inside, the air felt cooler, dimmer, shaped by the memories that lived in every familiar object. He reached up to the cupboard where Maggie used to keep a small bowl, the simple ceramic one with a blue rim. She had always insisted on keeping it for guests, though the only real guest she'd ever used it for was the stray tabby she adored years ago. He held the bowl for a moment, thumb tracing the faint line where the glaze had thinned over time. "Still doing your work, Maggie," he whispered softly. He filled it with a little splash of milk, not much, just enough for a small visitor, and walked back out to the porch. Toby lifted his head the moment he returned, his ears angling forward with gentle curiosity rather than hunger. Mr. Ellis set the bowl down near the step, not too close, not too far, just enough to let the little cat feel free. "There you go," he said in a warm, measured tone. "No pressure. Just, if you feel like it." Toby approached with careful dignity, sniffing the bowl, then lowering his head for a small sip. There was nothing hurried in the way he drank, no desperation, just a quiet acceptance, as though he understood the gesture for what it was, a shared morning, extended a little longer. Mr. Ellis sat down again, watching the cat with a contented calm he hadn't felt in years. He found himself noticing simple things, the way sunlight danced along Toby's fur, the small shadow the bowl cast on the wooden step, the distant sound of Mrs. Harper humming in her kitchen next door, her window slightly ajar. "Beautiful morning, isn't it?" she called gently when she spotted him across the garden hedge. "It really is," he answered, and even he could hear the warmth in his voice, softer, fuller than in days past. She smiled knowingly, though she didn't pry. Neighbors of a certain age understand that good things don't always need to be explained. Toby finished his milk and sat near Mr. Ellis again, closer than before. The kind of closeness that said, "I trust this space," without needing to say anything at all. The breeze shifted again, lifting the edge of the curtain behind the porch door. It drifted outward for a brief moment like a breath before settling back into stillness. Mr. Ellis let his eyes follow it, There was something different about the house now. Not louder, not busier, just less empty. He looked down at Toby, who was now curled comfortably at his feet, and felt a quiet sense of gratitude bloom in his chest. "You know," he said softly, his voice almost blending with the breeze, "it's nice, not being out here alone." End quote. Toby blinked slowly, a delicate, feline affirmation, a shared moment of truth. And for the first time in a long while, Mr. Ellis felt the morning lean toward him rather than pass him by. The day no longer looked wide and solitary. It felt like it had a shape, a rhythm, a companion. Nothing grand had happened, no thunderous change, just small warmth settling into familiar corners. Sometimes, that's all a heart needs. He reached for the leaf again, the tiny crescent tear glowing faintly where the light touched it, and placed it gently on the porch rail, not as a keepsake, but as a quiet acknowledgement that small gifts deserve a place to rest. Then he let the morning close around him with a softness he hadn't felt in years. Not like an ending, but like the beginning of something gently new. The morning had grown deeper, richer. Not quite afternoon, not quite the lingering softness of early hours, but a gentle in-between, where shadows stretched just enough to remind the world that time was moving, even if slowly. Toby remained at Mr. Ellis's feet, eyes half closed, the tiniest breeze lifting his fur in small, lazy waves. The little ceramic bowl sat empty on the step, catching light in its blue rim like it had been waiting all these years for this single quiet purpose. Mr. Ellis leaned back in his chair, letting his palms rest on the worn wooden armrests. The wood felt warm now, warmed by the sun, and maybe by something else too, something that lived inside moments like this, moments that asked nothing but offered much. He watched the maple tree sway gently in the yard. Only a few leaves danced on its upper branches, but each one moved with a kind of familiar grace, the kind that reminded him of summer days long gone, of laughter echoing against the house, of Maggie leaning over her garden with a humming tune caught between her lips. For a moment, the weight of those memories pressed softly against him, not heavy, not painful, just present. He looked down at Toby again, curled with such simple trust, and felt something ease inside him, as though the world had shifted just slightly to let him breathe a little deeper. "You know," he said quietly, almost to himself, "things change, but not all at once." His voice carried no sadness, only truth, softened by time. The porch creaked gently, almost as if agreeing with him. The sound folded into the morning breeze, then drifted away toward the street where the world moved in its slow, predictable way. A car rolled by with a soft engine hum. A neighbor shut a gate somewhere in the distance. Children's faint laughter traveled on the wind like a promise that life kept going, even in the smallest corners. Mr. Ellis's eyes drifted to the leaf he had placed on the porch rail, the one with the tiny crescent tear near the stem. It caught a ray of sunlight, glowing for a heartbeat before the light shifted again. Funny, he thought, how such a small thing could hold so much meaning, not because it was grand, or rare, or even permanent, but because it arrived at the exact moment a heart had room for it. He let out a slow breath, the kind that carried months of stored quiet. Not a sigh, not a release, just a settling. The kind of breath a man takes when the world feels gentler than it did yesterday. Toby stretched, then long, luxurious, a tiny ripple of life, and stood up. He didn't walk away. Instead, he stepped forward onto the space between Mr. Ellis's feet and sat again, facing the yard as though he intended to share the rest of the day with him. The small gesture nudged a smile from Mr. Ellis, one that was soft around the edges, warmed by more than sunlight. "Well," he said, voice warm and low, "looks like we're both choosing to stay a little longer." A quiet pause followed, not empty, never empty, but full of something clean and honest. He let his gaze rest on the neighborhood, the familiar fences, the soft hum of life, the porch that had witnessed decades of quiet mornings and long evenings. For the first time in a long while, the space didn't feel like a reminder of what was missing. It felt like a place where new things could begin, gently and without hurry. And as the breeze lifted once more, brushing past his sleeve and stirring Toby's whiskers, Mr. Ellis felt a thought rise inside him, clear, simple, soft enough to speak aloud. Maybe, he whispered, kindness doesn't really disappear, it just waits for the right morning to come back. The maple leaves rustled lightly, almost like they were nodding. Toby blinked slowly, settling into the sunlight, and the porch, old, familiar, quietly faithful, held the moment exactly as it was. Warm, uncomplicated. Enough. Mr. Ellis closed his eyes for a heartbeat, letting the stillness touch him without fear. When he opened them again, the day felt different, gentler around the edges, steadier under his feet. Thank you, he murmured, though he wasn't speaking to anyone in particular. To the morning, perhaps, to the memory of Maggie, to the small creature beside him, to the little leaf with the crescent tear, to the simple grace of being reminded that connection still finds its way. He rested his hand on his knee, letting the sun warm the back of his fingers. And, thank you, he added quietly, for sitting with this story today. The morning settled, the world breathed, and somewhere inside that soft, ordinary light, life felt a little lighter too.